you for a first-time director, co-director. You did a fantastic job. I think you had the best advice that you could possibly get, the best collaboration that you could possibly get. It's a well-told story. Something you just mentioned caught my attention as it relates to a point in the film about how, as international mail evolved, it fell into the hands of other entities who were less risk averse or more risk averse, and were more interested in satisfying the bottom line and their shareholders. And what caught my attention was that you, as a filmmaker, took a huge risk in telling this story. Not because it's not a story that people don't want to hear, but because, as you said, you had an idea. It didn't gel overnight. It took years to develop. And how, if you can think back to you 6 years ago and you today, how has taking that risk changed you?
Wow, that's such a powerful question. I mean, how it has changed me personally is the wonderful thing about film is it's like life in that perfectionism is not possible. And I was trained as an artist and a designer, and so it was all about carefully considered everything. And something that got thrown out the window a bit with the film is that we're dealing with moving images, we're dealing with moving stories, we're dealing with themes that come in and out. And it made me realize that not everything can be precious. And what your job is to do is to tell the best story that you can tell, the quote unquote truest story that you can tell from all this footage. And I think that is part of what made telling the story so challenging for me, is because, like Kill Your Darlings, like there's so much on the cutting room floor that was like painful to lose. And I think for all of us at different moments, there were things that were lost. But what the end product is, what this film is like a document. It's a document of all these choices that were made and this sort of shaping and thinking critically about all this information we had and presenting that to the world as this document. And I mean, I think that there could be other films made about international mail. I mean, I hope that people take a lot of the themes that we talk about in this film and introduce in this film and dig deeper, not necessarily about international mail, but if they want to do that, that's cool too. But no, just about us culturally, because it is such rich terrain. I mean, I think the really beautiful thing that I've taken, for instance, from the trans movement too, which sort of connects to this, is that why are we always thinking in this binary way? Like the most beautiful thing I think the trans movement has taught me is like things can exist on the spectrum. And we see this in sort of the Gen Z population and younger folks, like why do we have to think in this sort of rigid compartmentalized way? I mean, that's a whole huge conversation in and of itself. But I think in the same way, that's what I learned through the film, is that like, this is the story we found in working with these people at this time, with this material. And I'm really, as I said before, I'm really proud of what we created.
You think about the trailblazing efforts of your team, and you think about what Gene did all of those years ago, starting with a pair of medical support undergarments, which
Yeah.
I had to chuckle because you don't, it's interesting the inspiration that you get from the most innocuous of items. And God, forgive the phrase, God bless yourselves for being willing to take that risk and for sharing this story. The subjects the popular subjects that you got, not just the family, but you mentioned Carson Kressley. I was especially impressed that Matt Bomer narrated us and guided us through history. It really became a community effort, and I want to thank you very much for your film. I know audiences are going to see it on opening night at Desperado. As a matter of fact, one of our own in the community, Dion, was a former employee of International Mail, and I know he's definitely excited to see it, and I can't wait for audiences to see his spots in the documentary. It's a wonderful film.
I mean, Dion Brown, Dion, if you watch this, we love you so much. We love I don't know, Dion, his story's so wonderful because he's such a young person when he works there. He's like a young, like queer person, and just, I feel like he captures that sort of youthful energy in our story of like sort of telling this and sort of looking back on it. And, we realize things through his stories that made it into the film that I think are really powerful as like young queer people at that time, with what was unfolding with HIV/AIDS and in our culture. And yeah, I'm forever grateful. There's this photo of him just with all these like pieces of luggage, which I won't spoil for the audience, but I'm just like, can I please just have a poster of this, Dion? Because it's so wonderful. I mean, you asked me earlier, what did Jesse think at like when he first had this idea versus, at the end of it. And, honestly, it started off totally by accident. I was working in my office. A colleague was moving out. He had taken a new job, and someone had given him as a joke present these 2 International Mail catalogs, and they were sitting on the recycling bin. And I picked them up like I was doing like archaeological work, and I like held them up to me, and I said, "Oh my God, you're giving away these he's like, you're recycling these International Mail catalogs." And he was like, "Yeah, do you want them?" It was a joke present. And I was like, "Oh my God, this meant so much to me." So, honestly, it started off as this little like, "Oh, well, Brian, why don't we make a 3 to 5 minute short on what this meant to gay men?" And it was this great privilege as like a filmmaker where as you uncover a story, it becomes so much more. And that was, I guess, to connect it to what I said, that was the really beautiful process for me of just like realizing this is a story about so many things and so many lives. And I'm so glad that it can exist. We lost Gene shortly after we recorded his interview. And I'm so glad there's this record of him because I really, really admire him and admired what he did.
The human gene, the humanity, excuse me, really came out. It impressed me that he was not concerned with money, that I don't even want to say he was concerned with image. He just wanted to put something out in the world that mattered to people. And you guys accomplished that with your documentary as well.
Well, yeah, thank you. Gene was a challenge actually, because Gene had a lot of trepidation about us telling the story, and it really took Peter coming on board to really fully grasp. Because I randomly was quickly introduced to Gene shortly after having this initial idea. And I said, oh, Gene, I want to make this funny little thing about what this meant to gay men. And for him, like, that was a bit off-putting, to be completely frank with you, because that was sort of what he was campaigning against through the creation of this. And that's the really beautiful thing about my relationship with him too, is that this whole process of discovery and learning happened with a friendship that happened with Gene too, of like getting to know him and really, you know, all of our ideas sort of evolving or coalescing together. You know, that was important. And I'm really, he turned to me like very towards the very end of his life. We were having lunch together and we ended up alone talking, like the other people, I forget who was at the table with us, but he turns to me and he's like, he just said, oh, I'm really glad we did this. I'm really glad I was a part, and you opened my eyes to a lot of things I didn't realize about myself and about the story. Because he famously, if Peter was here, he'd tell the story of like him going down to see Gene and Gene being like, why do you want to make a movie about international mail? You know, he'd be like, well, who would want to see that? And,
Right.
You know, a lot of people evidently.
It fits, like you said, it fits into so many cultural touchstones in our history, like a finely crafted puzzle piece, right? It connects the dots. It gives importance to events, and it rationalizes irrational fears and irrational boundaries, and allows us as the audience to explore wants, needs, and desires. I dare say it doesn't give us permission to do that, but it makes us a lot more comfortable in wanting to do so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, recognizing that the film can't do everything, but it can introduce a whole group of people who knew it and didn't know it to think more about some of the things we introduce. Like, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, maybe this is slightly controversial to say, but I'll say it because I think it's important. Like, you know, part of what's happening culturally is the labeling of masculinity as toxic. And my question to everyone, myself included, is what does good masculinity look like? Because on the one hand, we're still eroticizing the Tom Cruises. We're still eroticizing the 6 and 12 and 16 pack abs, you know, and so what does it mean? What does this quote unquote good masculinity look like? You know, it's a rhetorical question that we explore. And I think the brilliant thing about the International Male story is it served as this really great opportunity to explore what it's like when you press against boundaries of masculinity in our culture.
Absolutely. I thank you for that question. You know, I would imagine that if we posted that on Facebook or Instagram, we'd get some very interesting answers, because I don't think it's a conversation that we're having right now, and you know, bringing it up as a topic, covering it in the documentary as you do is important, and it doesn't go unnoticed. You know, I'm trying to think here. Have Alan edit this part out. I hope.
Yeah, please edit me out when I'm incoherent too.
No,
because you
you're
ask
fine.
me some long questions. I'm like, I don't know if I'm covering all of these things.
No, the documentary touches on so much. At the risk of repeating myself, it covers so much ground that I truly hope audiences can walk away from this not wanting to go to eBay to find old copies of International Mail for $50 and hanging them on their wall, but to appreciate what international mail represented and what it is that we have today. The diversity and the freedom without boundaries to be creative, and to put yourself out there on social media is just as important. And it it wouldn't be possible without what you guys documented in the documentary.
I know it was so important for us to connect it to connect the story to today, and I know that that's something that we had numerous conversations about, because there's like a lot of contradictions that happen in the 80s. For instance, like you have Miami Vice at the same time you have Reagan in the White House. You have AIDS, you have Reagan not talking about AIDS. Like you have, rock, like you have all these things. And then in the 90s, you have a company that like wants to become more conservative at the helm of international mail. And at the same time, they end up making some of their most boundary pushing clothes. This is again the whole pushing against the boundaries and boundaries changing, culture changing. And I mean, we're all operating concurrently in this vacuum. And it's what's so powerful now with what I would say is the democratization of representation. Like, for young listeners or viewers right now, it's like, imagine a world where you don't see any other trans people. And we live in a world now where we can immediately find trans people mediating themselves and talking about everything from COVID to sex work to transitioning to all of these things. And we can find a whole spectrum of men talking about what it means to be a man, and showing us all these different ideas of what manhood is. And so that's that sort of spectrum thinking. I know I've come back to the trans movement a few times, but I just think we're all aware of these spectrums happening, and there's tremendous resistance from the right in some ways against this sort of spectrum experience. And there's sort of like, a sort of naive embrace on the other side sometimes with it. But I think we as a culture are really sort of pushing and exploring that. And I'm so thankful for that. I mean, yeah. I suppose that's the best part of a democracy, I mean, there's still a dominant image though. And I mean, that's hopefully something that we take apart over time. We certainly see a more, when you go back, I was watching like a series of 80s movies and I was just like, God, they're so white. Like it's just so much whiteness and it's so familiar. And, without this experience today, I wouldn't be able to look so critically. It's really thrown open the rule book, as far as what's allowed and what isn't. And there are many wonderful things about social media. There are many toxic things about social media, but I think ultimately they're pushing us forward as a culture. Because yes. I think ultimately, and to connect this back to the film and to the family, it's like people learn through stories. It's like how many look at former Vice President Dick Cheney, who was, pretty hardcore right. When his daughter came out, suddenly what do they call it? His opinion evolved on the subject. But and I think that's probably pretty true, hopefully. I think that, God, I can't believe I'm talking about Cheney and this. Maybe strike that out. But that's what I mean. Like, that's our hope, standing on top of the tower with your arms crossed saying, no, 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 isn't going to change hearts and minds. It's like the personal stories that change hearts and minds. It's the knowing someone who's LGBT, knowing someone who's trans, knowing someone who's a person of color who's, faced oppression or stigma or whatever, or brothers and sisters and trans folks living with HIV/AIDS, it goes on and on. But when we see representation, either on television, on social media, etc., we start to get more comfortable as a culture with these things. And that has the potential of moving everyone forward. Hopefully.
Absolutely.
Gosh, I sound
Absolutely.
optimistic.
Well,
Let's be optimistic.
right.
Let's dare to be optimistic.
Absolutely. No, I agree with you. It's the conversation that I think is not just our conversation here that's happening right now. It's the overall conversation, and you and your team are a part of that. Your documentary is a part of it. Again, I want to thank you very much for your time today. I'm excited for audiences to see this uh, fine piece of art and artistry about artists and art, and the artistry and the magic and beauty of not just male form, but of humanity. It connects us in ways that we don't even realize. And thank you very much.
Well, thanks to you too for being such a supporter of the film and for this invitation. We all appreciate it. And just thank you for believing in us. I'm excited for the community there to get a chance to see it and have their own set of reactions to it.